Welcome back to Recap Spot. Today we'll be recapping a monster movie called The Monster. The film opens with a young girl named Lizzie as she packs some bags for a trip. She cleans up lots of beer bottles from the living room and does some dishes. She then goes to wake up her mom and is upset because her mom, Kathy, is sleeping in late. Kathy is irritated when she gets up and orders Lizzie to go load the car. Lizzie comments that she should have just had her dad pick her up, which annoys Kathy.
Get up.
When Kathy finally gets up and starts getting ready, she finds Lizzie in the living room playing with a lighter. Kathy apologizes for sleeping in, but Lizzie doesn't want to hear it. Eventually they hit the road and there's an awkward silence in the car. Lizzie plays with a stuffed animal in the car that sings various children's songs, like If You're Happy and You Know It and Pop Goes the Weasel. They stop at a gas station so Kathy can smoke, and she tells Lizzie to roll her window down so she can give her a gift. The gift turns out to be a watch that used to belong to Kathy's mom.
I was gonna give you this when we got there.
Lizzie asks why she's giving it to her now, and Kathy says it's because she knows Lizzie isn't going to come back from her dad's house. Things are tense, and Lizzie suggests that they should drive all the way to her dad's house in one go instead of stopping in Arlington like they were planning. The film then cuts to a flashback of Lizzie and Kathy arguing. Kathy is trying to get Lizzie in the car because Lizzie has a play at school tonight, but Lizzie is refusing. She eventually says that she doesn't want Kathy to go to the play, and Kathy is hurt. She eventually begins yelling obscenities at Lizzie and tells her that she can walk to the school before driving off.
I hate you.
Back to the car trip, later in the night, Kathy pulls over in the woods in order to smoke and asks Lizzie if she still wants to keep driving. Lizzie says that she wants to make it all the way there that night, and she called her dad and he said he would stay up to wait for them. As they continue to drive, it eventually starts raining, and Kathy scares Lizzie a little bit by talking in a creepy voice. The two start to get into a fight when Kathy suddenly hits something on the road and crashes the car. Both girls lose consciousness, but eventually Kathy comes to. She's bleeding on her forehead and has injured her wrist. She checks on Lizzie, who thankfully is okay.
What do we do?
Kathy says they need to call 911 when their car suddenly loses power. Lizzie eventually calls 911 and explains where they are, and the authorities say that they're sending a tow truck and ambulance to help them. Some time passes and the rain eventually stops. On the road is the wolf that caused the crash when Kathy hit it. Lizzie asks if it's still alive, but Kathy assures her that it's dead because it hasn't moved at all while they've been waiting there.
What if it's still alive?
Kathy wants to get out of the car to look at the car's damage, but Lizzie is scared of the wolf. Eventually, Kathy is able to convince her to be brave and get out of the car, and she eventually tells Lizzie to call her dad because he'll have to pick Lizzie up from wherever the ambulance takes them. Lizzie calls her dad and explains the situation to him, and it's clear from their conversation that he thinks Kathy was under the influence while driving. The film once again cuts to a flashback, and we see Kathy trying to stay sober and fight her alcoholism. She's sitting in the kitchen trying to eat ice cream instead of giving in to her addiction, but she ends up digging through the trash to find a bottle with some alcohol still left in it. She still tries to fight off her addiction and tries to convince herself to just go to bed. Tragically, she ultimately ends up succumbing and chugging what's left of the bottle.
Just go to bed. Just go to bed.
That night, Lizzie finds her mom passed out on the bathroom floor and ends up cuddling her. Back on the road, Lizzie and Kathy approach the wolf that's laying in the street. Kathy looks closely at it and finds a large tooth embedded in the wolf's neck, meaning it didn't die from the car crash. Kathy and Lizzie go back to the car and Lizzie gets freaked out as Kathy says she thinks the wolf was fighting something before the crash. Eventually, the tow truck arrives, and a man named Jesse gets out of the truck to come help Kathy and Lizzie. Lizzie suddenly notices that the wolf is no longer on the road and gets freaked out. Jesse gets to the window of the car and tells Kathy that the ambulance is held up and won't arrive for a little bit longer. He then offers to take their bags to his car and start trying to get their car running. Lizzie is still freaking out over the missing wolf.
Where'd the wolf go?
But Kathy tells her that it probably crawled into the woods to die. Jesse eventually figures out that the car's axle is broken in half, and he says that he'll have to work on it before he can tow them. In the car, Lizzie looks at the tooth they found and comments on how it's much bigger than a dog's tooth. She keeps worrying about the wolf until her mom eventually tells her to stop. Kathy wants Lizzie to call her dad and asks where her phone is. Lizzie says it's in her bag, which is now in Jesse's tow truck, and Kathy tells her to go get it. Lizzie is reluctant to get out of the car, but eventually goes to ask Jesse about getting the phone. He tells her she can go in the truck, but it's locked, so he tells her he'll be over in a minute. Lizzie wanders and eventually finds the wolf's body in the woods. Lizzie calls for her mom to tell her she found the wolf, but Kathy doesn't hear her.
Mama, come look!
As she calls out, a monster can be seen coming up from behind her. However, it soon disappears. We then see another flashback, and Lizzie can be seen calling out for her mom. She eventually finds Kathy passed out on the couch and goes to grab a knife from the kitchen. She holds the knife to her sleeping mom and whispers that she hates her and wants her to go away. The flashback ends, and we see Lizzie getting back into the car with Kathy. Outside, Jesse hears growling approaching the car and suddenly stops responding to Kathy and Lizzie.
Let's go, man! Come on!
Kathy gets out to investigate but can't find any sign of him. Suddenly, a human arm is thrown onto the hood of Kathy's car, scaring Lizzie. Kathy gets back into the car and comforts her daughter. Jesse begins crawling up the road, severely injured. The girls watch in horror as he tries to crawl to the safety of his car, but ultimately gets eaten by a monster. We then see another flashback, this time of Lizzie hiding while Kathy's abusive boyfriend Roy is screaming about his beer missing. He thinks that Lizzie stole the beer and comes to yell at her. After he storms off, Kathy slaps Lizzie and leaves, while Lizzie calls for her and clutches her stuffed animal. Back in the car, Kathy tells Lizzie that she's going to go into Jesse's truck and take a look around, but Lizzie begs her not to leave the car.
What's out there?
Lizzie's stuffed animal begins making noise and alerts the creature to where they are, causing it to grab Kathy and yank her through the car window. It viciously attacks her until the headlights from the approaching ambulance make it go away. The paramedics rush to Kathy's side and get her loaded into the ambulance. Kathy and Lizzie beg the paramedics to drive away, but one of the men goes missing. The others go to look for him, but it's no use. A female paramedic gets into the ambulance and prepares to drive away, when the body of one of the other paramedics is thrown onto the hood. The monster begins crawling on the outside of the ambulance and snatches the female paramedic away, killing her. It tries to go after Lizzie and Kathy, but it's repelled by Kathy's flashlight.
Go, Mom, go!
Kathy and Lizzie try to drive away in the ambulance, but the monster rams into the side of it and tips it over. Kathy and Lizzie are knocked out in the crash, but Lizzie eventually wakes up. She wakes up her mom, who is terrified, and checks over Lizzie to make sure she's okay. Kathy tries to use the ambulance's radio to call for help, but it doesn't work. The monster shows back up and begins banging on the outside of the ambulance. It eventually makes its way in, but gets hurt and runs away when Kathy uses her flashlight on it again. The creature prowls around outside the van and growls. Kathy's wounds start to get the better of her, and she begins vomiting blood. She tells Lizzie they need to make a fire, so that way someone will see them and can rescue Lizzie. Lizzie tries to convince her mom that they can both escape, but Kathy knows that she has to distract the creature so that Lizzie can get away.
I'm gonna need you to be brave. Okay.
Kathy makes a makeshift torch and uses it to draw the creature away from the ambulance, and she tells Lizzie that she has to run when Kathy tells her to. Lizzie promises that once she gets away, she'll bring back people who can help. Kathy calls out to the creature and taunts it as she runs into the woods. She eventually puts the torch out and tells Lizzie to run. The creature finally finds Kathy and begins to rip her apart, but suddenly Lizzie shows up and begins trying to fight the creature off. Using her flashlight, she makes it go away, but it's too late and Kathy dies in her arms. Lizzie runs back to the ambulance and grabs a lighter, a can, and her stuffed animal. She uses her stuffed animal to draw the creature's attention and bring it back to the ambulance. When it comes back, Lizzie is prepared and sets it on fire using the lighter and the spray can. The creature is set on fire and eventually burns to death. Lizzie goes to investigate the body, when it suddenly springs back to life and Lizzie has to beat it to death one more time. The film then cuts to another flashback, this time of Kathy lying with Lizzie and telling her that she's going to be so good, and she can be whatever she wants to be. When we cut back to present-day Lizzie, it's finally morning, and she walks out through the woods, eventually making it to a clearing.